In the Phaedrus, Plato is explicit that the best lovers, the philosophical lovers, don't have sex. But why? There seems to be very little textual evidence in the Phaedrus that gives us any kind of argument for this conclusion, and it's a radically countercultural conclusion, so why does Plato hold it? There's actually only one clue in the text of the Phaedrus that suggests an answer, and that's when he says that people who pursue beauty badly go after unnatural pleasures in the manner of a four-footed beast. But this is also strange, for why would homosexual sex be an unnatural pleasure? And the mere fact that something is a pleasure doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue it for Plato. There are plenty of good pleasures. So if we want to work out this question, it looks like we're going to have to read more Plato, because the Phaedrus doesn't give us anything else to work with. The laws? What's the laws? The Laws was the last work that Plato wrote. In fact, it's not even clear that he finished it before he died. It's also his longest and in many ways his most detailed work. The details can get overwhelming, and a lot of people have found the work boring because of these details. But if you're asking very specific questions about Plato's views, the Laws is an extremely helpful resource. And I think this is certainly true on the question of love and sex for Plato as well. In the Laws, where Plato is trying to design another good city, like the Republic, but more feasible, he gives two criticisms of homosexual sex. In the first place, it's prohibited because he thinks that the proper function of sex is for the procreation of good children. And this comes up in his discussion of marriages in Book 6. The second criticism is that homosexual sex, and in general, any kind of non-procreative sex, undermines the ability of somebody to become more self-controlled and to become more self-disciplined. And that way, he's concerned that indulging in extreme and intense pleasures is likely to lead people to become intemperate and thus unvirtuous. So let's be brave and venture into the Laws and see if we can find some better arguments that Plato gives for why he thinks that the best lovers don't engage in sexual behavior. The first point about marriage in the Laws that you need to be aware of is that, unlike in the Republic, Plato reinstates the nuclear family in the Laws. He seems to think that the laws of the Republic, where everybody had wives and children in common and that there were no nuclear families, strains human nature too far. And so in Magnesia, the city of the Laws, he goes back to a second best method, where nuclear families are reintroduced. Now, in ancient Greece, all marriages were arranged, so it's unsurprising that also in Plato's Laws, marriages are arranged between people. But what's interesting is the reasoning that Plato gives for how you're supposed to arrange these marriages in the first place. What's the goal for which the couples are put together? And that, we find out, is for the production of good children. The temperament of the husband and the wife have to be matched so that they have the best chance of producing good children. Plato thinks that many couples make mistakes in choosing to be with someone who's like them. And he thinks that this is actually bad for the raising of children because people's character traits tend to become more extreme, and the household becomes more extreme if they marry people who are like them. So say you're a really hot-headed, angry person, you're more likely to get along well with someone who also likes to yell, and when they're communicating, they're loud, and they're expressive in that way. And though it might be easier for two people like that to get along, Plato thinks this is actually really bad for the children because they're going to become even more hot-headed and angry themselves. So rather, what he recommends is that someone who is hot-headed and angry should get someone who, if anything, is averse to conflict and tends to be more calm, and who doesn't yell, perhaps even when they should. This way, the child will see both parts of the spectrum and then will be more balanced themselves. Well, that actually depends on a few factors. Firstly, if you're a woman, you have to get married between the ages of 16 and 20. If you're a male, you have to get married between 30 and 35. After your marriage, the period for making children is 10 years, and no more after that. You get fined, and you're unlikely to be elected to any public office because people see you as a lawbreaker. Same punishment. You have to follow the rules. The point is, if you're at the right age, you have to get married and you have to make babies for the good of the city. You don't get married because it's pleasant, you get married because the city requires of you to make good children. Actually, you're not allowed to do that either. Something Plato seems very concerned with is making sure that neither the wife nor the husband are drunk when people are making babies. He seems to think that alcohol seriously compromises the quality of the children, and so it's to be prohibited. You're not allowed to get drunk at your wedding, and you're not allowed to get drunk when you're in the period of child making. The procreation of children is not a task for bodies which are drunk and incapable. The growing embryo needs an orderly formation, firm, steady, and undisturbed. Whereas a person who is inebriated is all over the place, both in himself and in the way he treats others, since his body and soul are in turmoil. And when it comes to sowing seed, he is clumsy and inept, the person who is drunk. His offspring are likely to be outlandish, unreliable creatures, crooked in character and body alike. So he has to take care, ideally all the year round and throughout his life, but at the very least during the period of time when he is fathering children, not to do anything of his own volition which is damaging to health or which involves excess or injustice, since these qualities will inevitably rub off on the souls and bodies of the children he fathers, producing offspring who are altogether inferior. The reason I'm making such a big deal about this is because these passages make clear that Plato doesn't think that just because sex is between a husband and a wife, that everything's okay. Rather, the husband and wife have to have suitable qualities for each other to produce good children. Moreover, they have to be in the right period of life to produce good children. And they have to be in the right state. They can't be drunk or do anything that might compromise the quality of the child. What this means is that there are actually all kinds of regulations about sex that go far beyond questions about sexuality. Again, the goal is always to produce good children, and so any kind of sexual activity that doesn't produce good children, Plato thinks is going to be, in a way, unnatural, because it's not aiming at the proper end of sex, and it's not realizing the proper end of sex. It's clear then that Plato's thinking about sex in Book 6 of the Laws is teleological. He's asking what the function of sex is, and then he's determining the good of sexual activity in relation to that end. If sex produces good children, it achieves its end, and so is good. If it doesn't achieve that end, it's bad, and he says, unnatural. So the naturalness of sexual activity is determined relative to the end that Plato has set for it. Yep, and Plato would think that they're all unnatural and that you shouldn't do any of them. Now, the good philosophical news is teleological positions are actually pretty easy to argue against. For example, you could deny that Plato's right about what the proper function of sex is. For example, if sex is an expression of love or affection, then it doesn't matter that it doesn't produce good children. Or it might be that pleasure is a perfectly good end in and of itself, in which case there would be no issue if you achieved that end rather than procreation. Or you could just deny the teleological framework outright, and this is a criticism that often gets rallied against Aristotelian positions, which are also teleological. However, Plato gives another set of arguments as to why non-procreative sex is going to be harmful and should thus be prohibited. And that's because he thinks that, in general, engaging in activities that are intensely pleasurable undermine the development of self-control and self-discipline. And so insofar as we're trying to become virtuous, self-controlled, disciplined people, engaging in such activities is risky. But let's talk about that more in the next lecture.